Hi everyone, I'm Emmanuel and Rafael, and I'm pleased today to have with us Rafael Ramirez, the first professor of practice at Oxford University in scenario plannings and the head of scenario plannings program at the university, and also a founding partner at Norman Partners, a company which has helped Schneider Electric in its first steps into scenario planning. Rafael is a very influential person and definitely one of the lead experts in the world when it comes to scenario planning. He's working with companies, governments, and NGOs. Rafael, welcome.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel, for having me here, and I'm delighted to join you in this podcast.
So, Rafael, scenario planning doesn't mean predicting the future. Can you describe what is scenario planning about exactly?
Yes, it's actually in many ways very straightforward. I was yesterday talking with people from the Inter-American Development Bank on the future of Chile, for example. So what kind of policy would the Inter-American Bank inform the Chilean government with, or what kind of investments would they support, depends on the context that is being expected where that plan will live. If you think that the context is going to be pretty straightforward and remain more or less stable, you just go ahead with the plan. But if, like today, with COVID and huge debt and big tensions between China and the US, the big inequality that is growing everywhere in the world, famines given because of climate change, and so on, the context suddenly is no longer given. And so what you have to do is to spell out what context does your plan imply, which we call the ghost or the phantom scenario. What is the implicit context that you have in mind to go ahead with this plan or this policy? And what alternative futures might come towards you that are not the expected implicit ghost or phantom scenario that could happen to you? And can you make your strategy a bit more robust by making sure that it can do okay if a different future comes to you than the one that you plan? And what we do with scenario planning is we spell out the contextual assumptions in a given plan or intent or policy and manufacture 2 or 3 alternatives to the one that is expected that challenge those assumptions and prepare you for making yourself more robust. Even if none of the scenarios that you imagine come about, the fact that you've rehearsed different futures allows you to more nimbly and more quickly move from the intended plan to an alternative plan because you've rehearsed alternatives. So that's what scenario planning is about.
So scenario planning would help companies and governments understanding that what could happen in their environment may be different from what they would wish to happen. Because sometimes when we write a strategy, when we try to create the future, we usually, and it's probably in human nature, we usually try to choose the future that we prefer, that suits best our interest. Is scenario planning a way to stay honest and more objective with the future?
We cannot be objective about the future because objectivity, at least in science, is based on facts, and all of the facts are in the past. So it's not about being objective, it's about being useful. And the question that you asked reminds me of a conversation I had with the Canton of Geneva a couple of years ago. I was invited to talk to the planners there. And there are three different futures in the room battling each other. There was the preferred future that the politicians had sold to the citizens. There were the probable futures that engineers and accountants and economists have been manufacturing from yesterday's models. They took yesterday's data, they modeled it, and then they projected yesterday's models into the future, and they put up some probability that tomorrow would be like yesterday. And then there were the scenario futures, which are plausible futures. Not probable, not preferred, but possible, plausible. And as there is more and more uncertainty, more turbulence, more novelty, more ambiguity, the importance of the plausible future increases, the probable futures are actually quite useless because yesterday is no longer an information for tomorrow. And so forecasts are not reliable.
What you're saying, if I try to rephrase it, is, and you said it in a while ago, using scenario planning will make you nimbler, more agile, more flexible, more resilient. So is that the point? And why is it important in a crisis like this to be more resilient?
Yes, that is part of what it does, but that's not all that it does. A lot of people think of scenario planning as a way of making you less risky or seeing problems and challenges earlier, which it can do. More importantly, because I'm a business school professor, I like to see scenarios as an opportunity to see opportunities early and to look at the top line growth possibilities, not only the bottom line hedges that could come out of that. So from our point of view, the scenarios, and that often happens in a second iteration of the scenarios. In the first iteration, the world is going to end, our plants are not going to work well, we're going to have to sell 3 or 4 divisions, everything is going badly. In a second iteration, you say, okay, so in that world, these negative things happen, but what opportunities arise? And what new things come up? And with whom could we have a collaboration that we don't have a collaboration today? And what kind of different sources of value and of wealth creation might arise? What public goods are going to be invested in at that point? And how can we engage with that?
So are you saying that on top of being more nimble, making you more nimble, scenario planning also helps innovation? How can you tie this, scenario planning and innovation?
When I was in the corporate strategy team and the scenario team in Shell, my official title was visiting professor of corporate strategy and scenario planning in 2000 and 2003. My main counterpart within Shell, other than my fellow colleagues in the scenario team and in corporate planning, was the long-term corporate innovation team, led by Leo Rudhard at the time, who had led Game Changer, working for the next big business of Shell. And we wrote a couple of pieces together about how scenario planning informs not only innovation as it is today, but what kind of innovation might arise in the future. And one of the conclusions of the work is that you needed to populate any innovation with projects, skills, initiatives, but also with quite a lot of collaborations. And so one of the things that I've been working on for quite many years is that strategy in these complex times needs to be a much more collaborative strategy than a competitive strategy in order to seize the opportunities that turbulence, uncertainty, novelty, and ambiguity offers to companies as it comes towards us. And scenarios and scenario planning is a very good platform to open up conversations that were otherwise unavailable to the firm.
So, Rafael, the world and the business community at large is starting to understand that scenario planning has a lot of value in uncertain times like the ones we are living right now. And as one of the world leading experts, I'm sure that many people and organizations and governments have reached out to you. Is there anything you can share with us on what you've been working lately and how you see the world coming up?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. We've been fortunate that the methodology we've developed is a very adaptable methodology. And over the last few years, and these are all in the public record, so I'm not giving any secrets away. I've had the privilege of working, for example, with the IMF and doing scenario planning with the IMF. There's an article about this in the European Court of Auditors Journal, which I had the privilege to co-author with 2 of our IMF colleagues. We've been working with the future of whole scientific fields. So the Royal Society of Chemistry, the British government has an advisory group that I supported earlier this year on the future of food and rural affairs and agriculture. Extinction Rebellion has come and asked me for advice on the future of the movement. So you go from companies, intergovernmental organizations. We've had lots of live cases in our scenarios program from NGOs such as Mercy Corps and Oxfam and the National Breast Cancer Coalition in the United States and Diabetes UK on the future of everything from the future of humanitarian care to the future of diabetes. So we've had a very big variety of parties, and what we like is that the methodology sort of sits quite nicely and fits its way in a friendly way to challenge assumptions and to be helpful to leaders, whether you're working in an intergovernmental agency or a government or a city or an NGO or a scientific field or a company.
Last month, you published an article in the Harvard Business Review, which was pretty clear and pretty with ideas which are quite counterintuitive, saying basically that resilience is going to trump efficiency going forward, and that in corporates and in smaller organizations, roles may change between the CFO and the supply chain. Can you share a bit more on this?
Yes, thank you for that. So the HBR article in June, co-authored with two of my ex-students, Kieran McGinley, who was a student of mine in HEC Paris, and Steve Churchhouse, who was a student here at Oxford, and we're both colleagues now in Norman Partners. I looked at what the post-COVID world might bring to us. And we don't know if there will really be a post-COVID world. There's a current issue in The Economist about comparing the AIDS epidemic with the COVID epidemic. And the AIDS epidemic has not disappeared. There's no cure, there's no vaccine for AIDS. Maybe we will have to live with COVID in some way or another for perhaps a decade or more, as has been the case. So we do not know what kind of changes could happen, but certainly the first 30 years of the 20th century show you how much change can happen. The rise of the Bolsheviks, the rise of fascism, the Big Depression, the big pandemic of 1918, etc. So big changes are certainly possible. So what we looked at is, if we look at the legacy that we had coming into this COVID pandemic, it was a legacy in business of maximizing shareholder value and returns. And to do that, probably at least since the 1980s, the CFO became a very important, very easy to calculate ratios became the currency of doing business. And that created, as we know, a very efficient way of producing value with just-in-time, zero stocks, sweating assets hard. As we know, that zero stock, just-in-time efficiency is not resilient. And when you are hit by something like COVID-19, resilience becomes a much higher priority compared to efficiency. Efficiency is less important. It's not so much, am I going to pay 99 cents for a mask or 50 cents for a mask or $2 for a mask, is am I going to have masks? And when you have that requirement for resilience, the argument that we developed is that for firms, it is the procurement function, not just buying, but orchestrating a whole host of values to make sure that you have the masks and the PPE of the right quality at the right time and the right size, regardless of efficiency. So the relative value of procurement goes up and the relative value of finance goes down. Now, of course, in many organizations, procurement reports to the CFO, so that's the way it is. But the point is not so much the individual value of the CFO or the individual value of the chief procurement officer. It's the relative importance that they both have to make business viable down the road. And that is driven largely not only because of the requirement to be prepared for the next wave of COVID, God forbid, and the next lack of equipment that you might require, but also, and very importantly, and this is a point that many of the readers have not picked up as much as we would have liked to. There are $15 trillion of public money issued at the end of May, and it must be closer to 20 billion by the time trillion that we're now talking about. That money that the government is pouring into the economy to avoid a collapse will bring in different values to the economy than just shareholder return. A good example in the public record was the single biggest owner of Lufthansa, who did not like what the Merkel government was offering in terms of a rescue package for Lufthansa. He is quoted in the Financial Times saying, government has no role running an airline. Well, without the government money, his airline would have gone under. And so because of the situation that we're in, government is going to have an important role with public good values, not private return values, in companies that it has saved, and perhaps some of the debt will be converted into equity, but in any case will have a lot of power. And so there will be multiple values, not just private values, not just like in the Great Recession, the taxpayers, certainly in this country, bailed out the banks and forced more reserves on the banks, but otherwise the banks could continue doing private work. Here, the government is in to stay, certainly for many years. And procurement is well positioned to orchestrate how those different values, the values for the customer, the values for the citizens, the values for the shareholders and investors and lenders, the values that all of these parties, of course, the values that we require for the planet not to collapse because of climate change, the society, municipalities that host factories will want jobs, not just automation. All of those values are going to be articulated strategically by procurement more than by strategy. So I expect that the strategy function and the procurement function in different companies will work much more closely together in this coming decade than they did in the last 20 years.
So more resilience, more presence of governments in business, balancing the power of traditional financial institutions, so acting more for the greater good of a population rather than just for the ratio and the efficiency. So is that good or bad for climate change, to fight this climate crisis, which is the other one looming? Or is it just that climate emergency is something that is behind us and we're not going to care about until we really get rid of COVID and the amounts of debt that we're accumulating with all that money that governments are printing today?
It's a really good question, and this is where scenarios are very useful, because you can certainly manufacture a scenario where the environment falls by the wayside. Certainly in the places where lockdown is being lifted because of social distancing, the take-up of public transport is down, the take-up of private cars is up, and that means more pollution. And so it could very well be that the private-public responses to COVID make the climate emergency much worse than it already was. If you believe in the new Green Deal and initiatives where you are in Asia, certainly in China, where perhaps because pollution could create social unrest, the Chinese government might create a very big green investment, which will be copied everywhere else. It could be that the public-private collaboration that we draw attention to in the article, Harvard Business Review article, could accelerate not a going back to normal, but a bouncing forward to a more ecologically sustainable economy. The jury is out. Both scenarios are possible. We all know which one we prefer, but when it comes to personal choices, would you rather take a car or would you rather go and get yourself infected with COVID in a densely populated public transport? If you have the choice, many poor people don't have the choice. Now, it's encouraging that they have realized that they need to move to an alternative form of energy. My colleagues and friends in Extinction Rebellion say that the 2050 targets are way too late, that they have to do that a lot earlier. Can it be done earlier? Are we willing to exit the world that has been created around oil that quickly to save the planet? Are we going to be able to do that, or are we going to be in very serious climate related migration, wars, famines, and all kinds of horrors that are certainly plausibly going to come to us even during the decade of the 2020s?
If you had, just to finish, one advice to give to any CEO of large, small companies or startups in those times of turbulences or unknown or uncharted territories, what would it be?
I think that the CEOs or heads of strategy or senior people that come to see me about scenario planning, I always give them one piece of advice, which is go and talk to somebody else that is a peer. Another way is to check whether the conversation that the non-executive directors in the board and the executives are having with each other is as constructive and as courageous and as challenging as it needs to be. And if there's doubts that the wrong questions or things like, are we doing enough early enough and courageously enough about climate change or inequality or the debt that is going to hit the societies we're in, or the unemployment that is going to be caused by the new wave of AI-intensive automation, if those courageous conversations are not at the level that they would like to do, one would like them to follow Kees van der Heiden's advice in his book, Scenarios, the Art of Strategic Conversation, and raise the game of the courageous conversations that need to happen. So go and meet peers that have already tasted this, talk with them, see what has worked for them, and then try it out. It's not a very dangerous thing. Try it out for this or for that, see if it works, and if it does, you can then scale it up.
Collaboration is what will get us to the next.
Collaboration to have more courageous conversations and to challenge ourselves and to bring innovations forward together in ways that would not happen if we just innovated on our own.
Thank you, Rafael. Rafael Ramirez, founding partner at Norman Partners, director of scenario planning program at Oxford University, and first professor of practice at Oxford University in scenario planning. Thank you very much for your time today. It was a pleasure to have you here, and see you very, very soon.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.